In the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, beneath what is now a thriving suburban community, lies a secret so horrifying that local authorities buried all records for over 80 years. Between 1889 and 1923, the Ashford Institute for Moral Reformation operated under the iron grip of the Winchester family, claiming to cure society's most troubled souls through innovative medical treatments and spiritual guidance. Official documents show that 734 individuals entered those pristine white gates. Only 93 ever walked out alive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 34 years, the Winchester family perfected a system of human experimentation that would make modern scientists recoil in absolute horror. They called it therapeutic rehabilitation. The surviving medical records reveal it was systematic, torture disguised as cutting-edge science. When federal investigators finally breached those walls in 1923, they discovered evidence of medical horrors that challenged every principle of human decency known to civilized society. The complete truth about what happened inside the Ashford Institute remained sealed in government vaults, until a construction crew in 1987 unearthed underground laboratories that exposed the full scope of their nightmarish operation. The Winchester family had not simply built a treatment facility. They had created a sophisticated human experimentation center that would have impressed the most depraved minds in history. Pennsylvania, in 1889, stood at the crossroads of American progress and moral uncertainty. The Industrial Revolution had transformed Pittsburgh into a steel empire, drawing thousands of desperate workers from across Europe and the American countryside. The rapid social changes created perfect conditions for what would become one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in American history. Coal mines scarred the landscape while factory smoke choked the valleys, creating a world where human life seemed expendable and suffering appeared inevitable. The state had recently passed progressive mental health legislation that encouraged private institutions to develop innovative treatments for psychological disorders, addiction, and moral deviance. These laws, written with genuine humanitarian intentions, created loopholes that would soon be exploited by individuals whose understanding of human nature was twisted beyond recognition. The legislation offered substantial government funding and minimal oversight to qualified medical professionals who could demonstrate innovative approaches to treating society's most challenging cases. Dr. Samuel Winchester understood opportunity when he saw it. A man whose imposing 6-foot frame commanded immediate respect in any room, Winchester possessed the kind of intellectual charisma that made other medical professionals defer to his expertise without question. His piercing gray eyes held an intensity that patients found both comforting and unsettling, while his carefully maintained beard gave him the distinguished appearance of a progressive medical pioneer. Winchester had graduated from Harvard Medical School with highest honors, specializing in the emerging field of psychological medicine that promised to unlock the mysteries of human behavior through scientific observation and therapeutic intervention. Winchester's medical credentials were impeccable, but his true education had taken place during his residency at the infamous Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. There, he had observed experimental treatments that pushed the boundaries of medical ethics, learning techniques for psychological manipulation that he would later refine into instruments of unprecedented cruelty. His residency supervisor, Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, had been secretly conducting unauthorized experiments on patients deemed incurable by conventional medicine. Winchester had not simply observed these procedures. He had participated in them, documenting their effects with the clinical detachment of a scientist studying laboratory specimens. The influence of Dr. Blackwood proved transformative for Winchester's developing worldview. Blackwood believed that certain individuals represented evolutionary dead ends whose suffering served the greater good by advancing medical knowledge that could benefit superior specimens of humanity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This philosophy provided Winchester with intellectual justification for viewing human beings as research materials rather than patients deserving compassion and care. Under Blackwood's guidance, Winchester learned to suppress any emotional response to human suffering, replacing empathy with scientific curiosity about the limits of human endurance. Winchester's wife, Eleanor Winchester, brought her own dark expertise to their unholy partnership. A former administrator at the Boston Home for Unwed Mothers, Eleanor had perfected the art of psychological manipulation through her years of managing vulnerable women who had nowhere else to turn for help. Her delicate features and soft-spoken manner concealed a mind that found genuine satisfaction in controlling every aspect of another person's existence. Eleanor understood that breaking human will required patience and precision. Too much pressure would drive victims into protective madness, while too little would allow them to retain dangerous hope for escape or rescue. Eleanor had studied the techniques used by religious institutions to maintain control over their populations, adapting methods of confession, penance, and spiritual guidance into psychological weapons that could shatter the strongest personalities. Her experience with unwed mothers had taught her that shame was the most powerful tool for controlling human behavior, more effective than physical pain or material deprivation. She could identify within minutes the specific source of shame that would most effectively control any individual, whether it was sexual guilt, family disappointment, or personal failure. The Winchester family's operation expanded significantly when Samuel's younger brother, Dr. Marcus Winchester, joined their enterprise after completing his studies in experimental psychology at Johns Hopkins University. Marcus possessed an academic brilliance that complemented his brother's medical expertise, bringing sophisticated understanding of human psychology that elevated their crude brutality into something approaching scientific methodology. His doctoral dissertation had explored the relationship between physical pain and psychological compliance, research that would prove invaluable in designing their systematic approach to human experimentation. Marcus had spent 2 years studying with Dr. Emil Kreppelin in Germany, observing the latest European techniques for treating mental illness through controlled environmental manipulation and systematic behavioral modification. His time in Germany had exposed him to experimental methods that American medical institutions were only beginning to understand, giving him knowledge that would prove essential to the family's future success. Marcus returned to America with detailed understanding of how environmental factors could be manipulated to produce specific psychological responses, knowledge that would transform the Winchester family's operation from simple cruelty into sophisticated psychological engineering. The final member of this diabolical family was Dr. Margaret Winchester, Samuel's sister and the institution's head of nursing. Margaret had trained at the prestigious Johns Hopkins Hospital, where she had learned advanced surgical techniques and pharmaceutical knowledge that would allow the family to keep their victims alive far longer than nature intended. Her medical expertise ensured that their experiments could continue for months or even years without killing the subjects prematurely, maximizing both the scientific value and entertainment potential of their research. Margaret had developed a particular interest in pain management, not for relieving suffering but for controlling and manipulating it to achieve specific psychological effects. Her extensive knowledge of drugs and surgical procedures allowed her to calibrate exactly how much physical trauma a subject could endure while remaining conscious and responsive. She maintained detailed medical records that documented the effects of various treatments on different types of subjects, creating a scientific database of human suffering that would have impressed the most dedicated researchers. The Ashford Institute for Moral Reformation opened its doors on a crisp October morning in 1889, occupying a sprawling campus that had been designed to project an image of progressive medical sophistication. The main building featured clean lines and large windows that suggested transparency and openness, while carefully landscaped grounds created an atmosphere of tranquil healing that impressed visitors and government inspectors. The facility's location had been selected for its isolation from major population centers, providing privacy for their experimental work while remaining accessible to the corrupt network of officials who would become essential to their operation. The Institute's public mission focused on treating individuals suffering from alcoholism, moral degeneracy, sexual deviance, and various forms of mental illness through innovative combination of medical treatment and moral education. The Winchester family marketed their services as representing the cutting edge of scientific progress in understanding human behavior, promising to cure conditions that conventional medicine had declared hopeless. They published research papers in respected medical journals and gave presentations at professional conferences, establishing their reputation as pioneers in the emerging field of therapeutic rehabilitation. What made their operation particularly insidious was its foundation in legitimate medical science. The Winchester family had carefully studied contemporary research in psychology and medicine, using genuine scientific principles as the basis for their experimental program. Their methods appeared scientifically sound to outside observers because they were based on real medical theories, even though their application of these theories violated every principle of medical ethics and human decency. They maintained detailed research protocols and documented their procedures with the precision of legitimate scientists, creating records that would have appeared convincing to anyone who did not understand their true purpose. The Institute's success depended on a carefully cultivated network of corrupt officials, medical professionals, and social reformers who provided both protection and a steady supply of experimental subjects. Dr. Winchester had invested considerable effort in building relationships with judges, police officials, and social workers who could direct suitable candidates to his facility. These relationships were maintained through a combination of financial incentives, professional favors, and carefully orchestrated demonstrations of the Institute's supposedly revolutionary treatment methods. Judge Harrison Caldwell of the Allegheny County Court became one of their most valuable allies, routinely sentencing individuals to the Ashford Institute for crimes ranging from public intoxication to moral impropriety. Caldwell had developed an elaborate system of legal justifications that allowed him to commit almost anyone to the Institute's care, particularly targeting individuals from immigrant communities who lacked the social connections necessary to challenge his decisions. His courtroom became a recruitment center where the Winchester family could select subjects based on their specific experimental needs and personal preferences. Police Captain Robert Morrison controlled the flow of subjects through selective enforcement of morality laws that were broadly written enough to encompass almost any behavior that attracted official attention. Morrison's officers were trained to identify individuals who would make suitable experimental subjects, focusing on those who were isolated, poor, or otherwise unlikely to be missed by their communities. His department maintained detailed files on potential targets, including information about their family situations, personal weaknesses, and vulnerability to false accusations. The Winchester family's client base extended beyond corrupt officials to include wealthy individuals who paid substantial fees for the privilege of observing their experimental procedures. These clients, drawn from Pittsburgh's industrial elite, viewed the Institute's work as cutting-edge science that would advance human understanding while providing entertainment that satisfied their curiosity about human suffering. The family had developed sophisticated methods for presenting their experiments as legitimate medical research, complete with scientific explanations and theoretical justifications that made their clients feel like participants in important scientific advancement. Rather than witnesses to systematic torture, Dr. Ellington Hayes, one of Pittsburgh's most prominent physicians, served on the Institute's board of directors while secretly participating in their experimental program. Hayes provided medical legitimacy to their operation through his professional reputation and connections to the broader medical community. His endorsement carried sufficient weight to deflect suspicion from other medical professionals who might have questioned the Institute's methods or mortality rates. Hayes also provided access to medical supplies and pharmaceutical compounds that were essential to their experimental procedures. Perhaps most disturbing was the involvement of social reformer Mrs. Catherine Pemberton, whose organization, supposedly dedicated to helping troubled women, actually served as a recruitment pipeline for the Winchester family's operation. Pemberton's reputation as a compassionate advocate for society's unfortunates provided perfect cover for identifying and delivering vulnerable individuals to the Institute. Her organization maintained detailed records on potential subjects, including psychological profiles and personal histories that proved invaluable for designing personalized experimental programs. The Winchester family had also infiltrated Pennsylvania's emerging mental health system by establishing professional relationships with legitimate medical institutions throughout the state. Dr. Marcus Winchester served as a consulting physician to several state hospitals, allowing him to identify patients who could be transferred to the Ashford Institute for specialized treatment. These transfers were presented as opportunities for advanced care that would benefit patients who had not responded to conventional treatment methods. The family's financial operations were equally sophisticated, involving multiple revenue streams that ranged from government funding for medical research to private payments from wealthy clients who purchased access to their experimental subjects. Dr. Samuel Winchester had established relationships with pharmaceutical companies that paid substantial fees for human testing of experimental drugs and medical procedures. These arrangements were disguised as legitimate clinical trials that appeared to meet contemporary standards for medical research, even though they involved systematic abuse of unwilling subjects. The Institute also generated income through contracts with industrial companies that needed subjects for testing workplace safety procedures and environmental exposure limits. The Winchester family marketed these services as scientific research that would improve worker safety and industrial efficiency, convincing company executives that they were participating in important scientific advancement rather than human experimentation. These contracts provided steady income while satisfying the experimental curiosity of family members who enjoyed designing innovative forms of suffering. Life inside the Ashford Institute followed carefully structured patterns designed to break down human resistance while maximizing the scientific and entertainment value of each subject's suffering. The Winchester family had developed sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate every aspect of a person's environment to achieve specific psychological and physical effects, creating conditions that appeared medically sound to outside observers, while systematically destroying the humanity of everyone trapped within their walls. Dr. Samuel Winchester possessed an intellect that had been warped by years of observing human suffering without developing any emotional connection to the victims of his research. His academic brilliance had earned him recognition among Pennsylvania's medical elite, but his true genius lay in his ability to identify and exploit the darkest impulses of supposedly respectable individuals. Winchester understood that beneath the veneer of civilized society existed powerful men whose wealth and position had convinced them that ordinary moral constraints did not apply to their desires. The doctor had spent considerable effort cultivating relationships with individuals whose public reputations depended on maintaining an image of moral respectability while their private appetites demanded outlets that conventional society could never provide. These men did not simply tolerate the Winchester family's operation. They became its most essential supporters and most profitable customers. Winchester had learned that the most dangerous allies were those who had the most to lose from exposure, making them absolutely committed to protecting the Institute's secrets through any means necessary. Eleanor Winchester brought a different but equally valuable skill set to their enterprise. Her years managing vulnerable women had taught her that effective control required understanding the specific psychological vulnerabilities that made each individual susceptible to manipulation. She could identify within minutes the precise combination of fear, shame, and false hope that would most effectively control any subject who entered their facility. Eleanor's methods appeared gentle and nurturing to outside observers, but they achieved psychological destruction that proved far more complete than crude physical brutality. Eleanor had developed sophisticated techniques for identifying potential subjects among the general population, focusing particularly on individuals whose disappearance would attract minimal attention from law enforcement or social authorities. She maintained extensive files on immigrants, orphans, domestic servants, and others whose social isolation made them ideal candidates for the Institute's experimental programs. Her network of informants included domestic employment agencies, charitable organizations, and religious institutions that provided detailed information about vulnerable individuals who could be easily acquired. Dr. Marcus Winchester had returned from his European studies with knowledge of experimental techniques that American medical institutions had not yet begun to explore. His academic training had provided him with theoretical understanding of human psychology that he applied to designing systematic approaches to breaking human will and resistance. Marcus understood that true scientific advancement required careful documentation and controlled experimentation, principles he applied to their work with meticulous attention to detail. Marcus had established correspondence with European physicians who were conducting similar research, creating an international network of information exchange that allowed the Winchester family to remain at the forefront of experimental methodology. These relationships provided access to new drugs, surgical techniques, and psychological manipulation methods that had been developed in German and Austrian research institutions. The international connections also offered potential escape routes and safe havens should their American operation ever be discovered by authorities. Dr. Margaret Winchester served as the medical foundation that made their extended experimentation possible. Her surgical expertise allowed her to perform procedures that kept subjects alive and conscious during treatments that would normally result in death or permanent unconsciousness. Margaret had developed innovative techniques for managing pain and consciousness that enabled them to conduct experiments lasting weeks or months without losing their research subjects to medical complications. Margaret maintained detailed medical records that documented the physical and psychological effects of various experimental procedures on different types of subjects. Her research had identified specific combinations of drugs, surgical interventions, and environmental manipulations that could produce predetermined psychological responses with remarkable consistency. She had essentially created a scientific methodology for psychological destruction that could be replicated and refined through systematic application to new subjects. The Winchester family's success required the active participation of numerous accomplices who occupied positions of authority throughout Western Pennsylvania's legal and social systems. These individuals were not merely bribed or coerced into cooperation. They were genuine believers in the Institute's supposed mission and eager participants in its experimental programs. The family had successfully convinced their network that they were participating in cutting-edge scientific research that would ultimately benefit humanity by advancing understanding of human behavior and psychological treatment. Judge Harrison Caldwell had transformed his courtroom into an efficient recruitment center for the Institute's experimental programs. Caldwell possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of legal precedents that allowed him to justify committing almost anyone to the Institute's care through creative interpretation of Pennsylvania's mental health and public safety statutes. His legal expertise ensured that these commitments would withstand any potential challenges from family members or legal advocates who might question his decisions. Caldwell had developed a systematic approach to identifying suitable candidates among the defendants who appeared in his court. He maintained detailed notes on each individual's background, family connections, and social circumstances, using this information to select those who would be most valuable for the Institute's research while posing minimal risk of external investigation. His selection criteria prioritized individuals whose psychological profiles suggested they would respond interestingly to the Institute's experimental procedures. Police Captain Robert Morrison had restructured his department's operations to support the Institute's need for experimental subjects, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate law enforcement activity. Morrison's officers were trained to identify individuals who fit specific psychological and physical criteria that the Winchester family had established for their research programs. These officers learned to manufacture evidence and create legal pretexts that would justify arresting and committing targeted individuals to the Institute's care. Morrison had established special units within his department that focused exclusively on what he called moral enforcement activities. These units operated with extraordinary latitude in interpreting public order laws, allowing them to arrest individuals for behaviors that would normally be considered minor infractions or completely legal activities. The captain maintained detailed surveillance files on potential targets, including information about their daily routines, personal relationships, and psychological weaknesses that could be exploited during arrest and subsequent legal proceedings. The Institute's board of directors included several of Pittsburgh's most prominent businessmen who provided both financial support and political protection for the Winchester family's operation. Steel magnate Harrison Blackwood maintained a controlling interest in the Institute, while using his industrial connections to provide subjects for workplace safety experiments that tested the limits of human endurance under various environmental conditions. Blackwood's wealth and political influence made him effectively immune to legal prosecution, while his industrial empire provided perfect cover for disposing of experimental subjects whose usefulness had been exhausted. Railroad executive Jonathan Fairfax used his transportation network to facilitate the interstate movement of experimental subjects and research materials between the Institute and similar facilities in other states. Fairfax had established relationships with criminal organizations that specialized in human trafficking, allowing the Winchester family to acquire subjects from distant locations, while providing escape routes for family members should their operation ever be discovered by federal authorities. Banking executive Thomas Rutherford provided financial services that allowed the Institute to launder income from their various criminal activities through legitimate business investments and charitable foundations. Rutherford's bank processed payments from clients while maintaining accounts that funded the Institute's research activities and operational expenses. His financial expertise ensured that the family's wealth remained hidden from tax authorities and government investigators, while generating additional income through strategic investments. Dr. Ellington Hayes had used his medical reputation to recruit other physicians who provided specialized expertise for particularly complex experimental procedures. These doctors viewed their participation as opportunities to advance medical science through research that would have been impossible in conventional hospital settings. Hayes had convinced them that the Institute's patients were volunteers who had consented to participate in experimental treatments that might cure their various psychological and physical ailments. Social reformer Mrs. Catherine Pemberton had expanded her organization's activities to include systematic identification and recruitment of experimental subjects from among Pennsylvania's most vulnerable populations. Pemberton's charitable work provided perfect cover for gathering detailed information about potential subjects, while her reputation as a humanitarian deflected suspicion from her recruitment activities. Her organization maintained files on thousands of individuals who had sought assistance, creating a comprehensive database of potential experimental subjects. The Winchester family had also corrupted several religious institutions whose leaders provided theological justification for the Institute's experimental programs, while recruiting subjects from among their congregations. Reverend Dr. William Ashton of Pittsburgh's largest Presbyterian church had developed elaborate sermons about the spiritual benefits of suffering and sacrifice that prepared potential subjects psychologically for their role in the Institute's research. His theological expertise allowed him to convince deeply religious individuals that participating in the experiments was a form of divine service that would purify their souls while advancing God's plan for humanity. Catholic Father Edmund Morrison had established special confessional procedures that identified parishioners who were struggling with personal problems that made them suitable candidates for the Institute's treatment programs. Father Morrison used the sacred trust of confession to gather psychological profiles on potential subjects while convincing them that admitting themselves to the Institute would provide spiritual healing for their moral failures. His religious authority gave him access to information and individuals that would have been impossible for secular recruiters to obtain. The Winchester family's financial operations involved multiple revenue streams that generated enormous profits, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate medical and charitable activities. Government funding for mental health research provided substantial income that was supplemented by private payments from wealthy clients who purchased access to experimental subjects for their personal entertainment. Industrial contracts for safety testing and pharmaceutical agreements for drug trials created additional income sources that helped fund the Institute's expansion and operational expenses. The family had established investment partnerships with legitimate businesses that provided financial returns, while creating additional opportunities for acquiring experimental subjects. Their partnership with several coal mining companies allowed them to conduct workplace safety experiments while providing medical services to mining communities that were isolated from government oversight. These arrangements gave them access to injured miners and their families, who could be easily recruited for experimental programs under the guise of advanced medical treatment. Manufacturing contracts with textile companies provided opportunities to test the effects of various industrial chemicals and working conditions on human subjects while generating income from the production activities conducted by experimental subjects. The Winchester family had convinced factory owners that their research would improve worker productivity and reduce industrial accidents while their experimental subjects performed manufacturing tasks under controlled conditions that maximized both scientific value and economic return. The international connections established by Dr. Marcus Winchester had evolved into a sophisticated trading network that allowed the family to exchange experimental subjects, research data, and procedural innovations with similar operations throughout Europe and North America. This network provided access to experimental techniques that had been developed in other countries, while offering markets for subjects who had exhausted their research value in Pennsylvania. The international scope of their operation made investigation and prosecution extremely difficult for American law enforcement agencies that lacked jurisdiction over foreign activities. The Ashford Institute's carefully designed architecture served purposes far beyond creating an impressive facade for visitors and government inspectors. Every corridor, room, and hidden passage had been engineered to maximize psychological disorientation, while facilitating the systematic processing of human subjects through various stages of experimental treatment. The building's layout appeared logical and efficient to casual observers, but its true design created a maze of confusion that prevented subjects from developing any mental map of their environment or understanding of potential escape routes. The main entrance opened into a reception area decorated with expensive furniture and medical certificates that projected an image of professional competence and therapeutic innovation. Visitors who came to inspect the facility or deliver new subjects never progressed beyond these public spaces. which had been designed to reinforce the Institute's reputation as a progressive medical institution. The reception area featured comfortable seating, medical journals, and displays of awards that Dr. Winchester had received from various professional organizations, creating an atmosphere of academic respectability that deflected suspicion about the facility's true activities. Behind the public facade, the Institute's interior had been divided into distinct zones that served different functions in the Winchester family's experimental program. The processing area occupied the building's basement levels, where new arrivals underwent systematic evaluation and preparation for their role in ongoing research projects. These basement chambers had been soundproofed with multiple layers of insulation that prevented any noise from reaching the upper floors where legitimate business activities took place. The intake procedures began in what Dr. Margaret Winchester called the Medical Assessment Center, a sterile chamber equipped with examination tables, surgical instruments, and recording equipment that documented every aspect of each subject's physical and psychological condition. New arrivals were subjected to comprehensive medical examinations that cataloged their health status, physical capabilities, and potential usefulness for various experimental procedures. These examinations were conducted with clinical precision, creating detailed medical records that would guide their treatment throughout their time at the Institute. Dr. Margaret Winchester had developed standardized assessment protocols that evaluated each subject's pain tolerance, psychological stability, and resistance to various forms of manipulation. Her examinations included physical stress tests, psychological evaluations, and medical procedures that established baseline measurements for monitoring the effects of subsequent experimental treatments. The assessment process typically required several days of intensive evaluation, during which subjects were kept in isolation chambers that prevented them from communicating with other individuals or developing any understanding of their situation. Following medical assessment, subjects underwent psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Marcus Winchester, whose academic training had equipped him with sophisticated techniques for identifying the specific fears, desires, and emotional vulnerabilities that could be exploited to achieve maximum experimental value. His evaluation sessions appeared to be therapeutic interviews designed to help subjects adjust to their new environment, but they actually served to identify the most effective methods for breaking down psychological resistance and maintaining long-term control. Dr. Marcus Winchester had developed innovative questioning techniques that encouraged subjects to reveal detailed information about their personal histories, family relationships, and deepest fears without recognizing that they were providing their captors with weapons that would be used against them. His psychological assessments included standardized tests that measured intelligence, emotional stability, and susceptibility to various forms of suggestion and manipulation. The results of these evaluations determined which experimental programs each subject would enter and how long they could be expected to survive the treatment process. The Institute's experimental facilities occupied the building's second and third floors, where subjects were housed in specially designed chambers that could be modified to create specific environmental conditions for different research projects. These chambers appeared to be comfortable patient rooms when viewed by outside inspectors, but they contained hidden mechanisms that allowed researchers to control temperature, lighting, air quality, and sound levels with precision that enabled systematic study of environmental effects on human behavior and physiology. Each experimental chamber had been equipped with observation equipment that allowed researchers to monitor subjects continuously without their knowledge. Hidden cameras, microphones, and measuring devices recorded every aspect of the subject's responses to various stimuli, creating comprehensive documentation of how different individuals reacted to specific experimental treatments. The monitoring equipment had been disguised as medical devices or decorative elements that appeared normal to subjects who were unaware of their true function. Dr. Samuel Winchester had established systematic experimental protocols that subjected individuals to carefully calibrated combinations of physical stress, psychological manipulation, and pharmaceutical intervention designed to test the limits of human endurance while advancing scientific understanding of pain, fear, and behavioral control. These protocols appeared to be legitimate medical treatments when documented in official records, but they actually constituted systematic torture, designed to satisfy both scientific curiosity and the entertainment demands of paying clients. The experimental protocols included studies of pain response that subjected individuals to graduated levels of physical discomfort while monitoring their psychological and physiological reactions. Dr. Winchester had developed innovative techniques for inflicting pain that left minimal physical evidence while creating maximum psychological impact, allowing him to conduct extended experiments without alerting outside medical inspectors to the true nature of his research activities. Pharmaceutical experiments tested the effects of various drugs and chemical compounds on human subjects, who had no knowledge of what substances they were receiving or what effects the researchers expected to observe. Dr. Margaret Winchester maintained extensive records of drug reactions that documented how different individuals responded to experimental medications, creating a comprehensive database of pharmaceutical effects that proved valuable for both research purposes and controlling subject behavior. The Institute's most profitable activities involved what Dr. Winchester called personalized treatment programs that allowed wealthy clients to participate directly in designing and observing experimental procedures applied to specific subjects. These programs were marketed as opportunities for wealthy philanthropists to support cutting-edge medical research while gaining first-hand understanding of innovative therapeutic techniques. Clients paid substantial fees for the privilege of selecting subjects and specifying particular experimental treatments that satisfied their personal interests and curiosities. The personalized treatment programs included observation sessions where clients could watch experimental procedures through hidden viewing areas that provided clear sight lines while maintaining their anonymity. These sessions were presented as educational opportunities that would advance the client's understanding of human psychology and medical innovation, convincing them that they were participating in legitimate scientific research rather than witnessing systematic torture for entertainment purposes. Some clients purchased extended access to specific subjects, allowing them to design elaborate experimental scenarios that could continue for weeks or months, depending on the subject's physical and psychological endurance. These extended programs generated enormous revenue for the Winchester family while satisfying the complex desires of clients whose wealth had convinced them that other human beings existed primarily for their personal gratification and entertainment. The Institute had also developed what Eleanor Winchester called therapeutic education programs that subjected individuals to systematic psychological conditioning designed to modify their beliefs, values, and behavioral patterns according to specifications provided by clients or research objectives. These programs use techniques derived from religious conversion methods, military training procedures, and psychological manipulation strategies to achieve complete personality reconstruction over extended periods. The therapeutic education programs included isolation protocols that prevented subjects from maintaining contact with their previous identities or support systems while subjecting them to constant psychological pressure designed to break down their existing belief systems and replace them with new patterns of thought and behavior. The isolation was presented as necessary for therapeutic success, but it actually served to prevent subjects from maintaining psychological connections to their former lives that might enable them to resist the conditioning process. Environmental manipulation protocols controlled every aspect of the subject's physical surroundings to create specific psychological effects that supported the conditioning objectives. Temperature, lighting, sound, and air quality were systematically varied to create discomfort and disorientation that made subjects more susceptible to psychological manipulation, while preventing them from developing any sense of control over their environment. The Winchester family had established elaborate, record-keeping systems that documented every aspect of their experimental programs with scientific precision that would have impressed legitimate medical researchers. These records included detailed observations of subject responses, measurements of physiological changes, and analysis of psychological effects that created comprehensive databases of human reactions to various forms of systematic abuse. The experimental records were organized according to subject type, treatment methodology, and research objectives, allowing the Winchester family to identify patterns and refine their techniques based on systematic analysis of previous results. The records also served commercial purposes by providing detailed information about available subjects and their responses to different types of treatment, enabling clients to select individuals and procedures that would satisfy their specific interests and requirements. Financial records documented the enormous profits generated by the Institute's various activities while maintaining the appearance of legitimate medical and charitable operations that could withstand scrutiny from tax authorities and government auditors. The Winchester family had developed sophisticated accounting procedures that disguised payments from clients as charitable donations or research grants while recording experimental expenses as legitimate medical and administrative costs. The first crack in the Winchester family's carefully constructed empire began with an unexpected source that even their sophisticated network of informants and corrupt officials had failed to anticipate. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, a young physician, recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, had accepted a position as assistant medical examiner for Allegheny County with the idealistic goal of improving public health services for Pittsburgh's growing immigrant population. Whitmore possessed the dangerous combination of medical expertise and moral integrity that made him immune to the various forms of corruption that had neutralized other potential threats to the Institute's operation. Dr. Whitmore had begun noticing disturbing patterns in the mortality reports that crossed his desk during his first months in office. An unusually high number of death certificates listed causes of death that seemed inconsistent with the medical histories of the deceased individuals, particularly among those who had previously been committed to various private medical institutions throughout western Pennsylvania. His medical training had taught him to recognize signs of systematic medical malpractice, and the patterns he observed suggested something far more sinister than simple negligence or incompetence. The young medical examiner had initially attributed these irregularities to poor record-keeping and inadequate medical training among rural physicians who served the region's scattered mining and industrial communities. However, his systematic analysis of mortality data revealed that the suspicious deaths were concentrated among individuals who had been treated at a small number of private institutions that claimed to specialize in innovative treatments for mental illness and moral rehabilitation. The Ashford Institute appeared repeatedly in these records, with mortality rates that far exceeded those of comparable facilities. Dr. Whitmore's investigation intensified when his own sister, Rebecca Whitmore, disappeared after being arrested for public intoxication following a dispute with her employer over unpaid wages. Rebecca worked as a domestic servant for one of Pittsburgh's wealthy families and had never been in trouble with the law, making her sudden arrest and subsequent commitment to the Ashford Institute highly suspicious to her brother's trained medical mind. When Whitmore attempted to visit his sister at the Institute, he was told that she had been transferred to a specialized facility in another state for treatment that was not available in Pennsylvania. The medical examiner's requests for documentation of his sister's transfer were met with bureaucratic delays and contradictory explanations that only increased his suspicions about the Institute's actual activities. Dr. Samuel Winchester personally assured Whitmore that his sister was receiving excellent care and would be returned to Pittsburgh once her treatment was completed, but he refused to provide specific information about her location or medical condition. Winchester's evasive responses convinced Whitmore that something was fundamentally wrong with the Institute's operation and that his sister might be in serious danger. Whitmore enlisted the assistance of Detective Lieutenant Michael O'Connor, an honest police officer whose integrity had somehow survived the corruption that permeated most of Pittsburgh's law enforcement establishment. O'Connor had developed his own suspicions about certain arrest patterns and sentencing decisions that seemed designed to provide specific types of individuals to private institutions rather than to serve legitimate law enforcement purposes. Detective had noticed that arrests for moral offenses disproportionately affected young women and immigrants who lacked family connections or social standing to challenge the legal system. Detective O'Connor's investigation revealed systematic coordination between certain police officers, court officials, and private institutions that suggested an organized conspiracy to supply subjects for purposes that were not clearly explained in official records. His analysis of arrest reports and court proceedings identified numerous cases where evidence appeared to have been fabricated or where legal procedures had been manipulated to ensure specific outcomes. The detective's findings indicated that Judge Caldwell and Captain Morrison were central figures in this conspiracy, but the scope of the corruption extended far beyond these obvious participants. The situation became critical when Dr. Whitmore's examination of recent corpses revealed evidence of medical procedures and pharmaceutical treatments that were not documented in any official medical records. Several bodies showed signs of experimental surgery, drug testing, and other medical interventions that appeared to have been conducted for research purposes rather than therapeutic treatment. The physical evidence suggested that these individuals had been subjected to systematic medical experimentation before their deaths, contradicting the peaceful natural deaths described in their official medical records. Dr. Whitmore's medical expertise allowed him to identify specific surgical techniques and pharmaceutical effects that indicated advanced medical knowledge and sophisticated experimental procedures had been applied to these individuals. The evidence suggested that someone with extensive medical training and access to experimental drugs and equipment had been conducting systematic research on living human subjects. The scope and sophistication of these procedures indicated that they were not the work of a single rogue physician, but rather an organized program involving multiple medical professionals. The discovery that several of the deceased individuals had been officially committed to the Ashford Institute established a direct connection between the experimental procedures and Dr. Winchester's facility. Whitmore's analysis of the timing and circumstances of these deaths suggested that they represented only a small fraction of the total number of individuals who had disappeared into the Institute's experimental programs. The medical evidence indicated that the Winchester family had been conducting systematic human experimentation on a scale that dwarfed anything that had been previously documented in American medical history. Detective O'Connor's parallel investigation had identified financial irregularities and communication patterns that confirmed the existence of an extensive criminal conspiracy involving dozens of public officials, medical professionals, and wealthy private citizens. His analysis of banking records revealed substantial payments flowing from prominent businessmen to the Ashford Institute through various intermediary organizations that appeared to be shell companies designed to conceal the true source and purpose of the funds. The detective had also discovered correspondence between Dr. Winchester and medical colleagues in other cities that discussed the exchange of subjects and sharing of experimental techniques. This correspondence indicated that the Ashford Institute was part of a national network of similar facilities that were conducting coordinated research programs on human subjects. The scope of this network suggested that hundreds or possibly thousands of individuals had been victimized by similar operations throughout the United States and Europe. Dr. Whitmore's attempts to gather additional evidence were complicated by the sudden disappearance of key medical records and the mysterious deaths of several potential witnesses who had previously worked at the Institute. These developments convinced both Whitmore and O'Connor that their investigation had been discovered and that powerful forces were actively working to eliminate evidence and silence anyone who might expose the conspiracy. The investigators realized that they needed federal assistance to overcome the local corruption that protected the Winchester family's operation. The breakthrough came when Detective O'Connor discovered that Dr. Marcus Winchester had been corresponding with physicians in Germany who were conducting similar experiments under the auspices of legitimate medical research institutions. This international connection brought the case to the attention of federal investigators who had jurisdiction over interstate and international criminal activities. The federal involvement also provided protection for Whitmore and O'Connor, whose local investigations had made them targets for elimination by the conspiracy's enforcement mechanisms. Federal agents conducted simultaneous raids on the Ashford Institute and related facilities across multiple states, coordinating their efforts to prevent the destruction of evidence or the escape of key conspirators. The raids were timed to occur during the early morning hours when most of the Institute's staff would be present, and when the experimental subjects would be confined to their chambers. The federal agents were prepared for armed resistance and had brought medical personnel to provide immediate assistance to any survivors they might discover. The federal raid on the Ashford Institute revealed horrors that exceeded even the worst expectations of the investigating agents. Hidden chambers throughout the building contained dozens of individuals in various stages of physical and psychological breakdown, many of whom had been subjected to experimental procedures that had left them permanently disabled or mentally destroyed. The agents discovered operating rooms equipped with sophisticated medical equipment that had been used for procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics and human decency. The agents found extensive documentation of the experimental programs, including detailed medical records, photographs, and correspondence that provided comprehensive evidence of the scope and duration of the Winchester family's criminal activities. The documentation revealed that the Institute had processed over 700 individuals during its 34 years of operation, with survival rates that indicated systematic murder disguised as medical research. The records also provided evidence of the broader conspiracy that had protected and profited from the Institute's activities. Dr. Samuel Winchester was discovered in his private laboratory attempting to destroy critical documents and evidence. When federal agents breached the facility's security systems, his panicked efforts to eliminate incriminating evidence only served to confirm the investigators' suspicions about the criminal nature of his activities while providing additional documentation of his experimental procedures and client relationships. Winchester's capture prevented the destruction of records that would prove essential for prosecuting the broader conspiracy. Eleanor Winchester had apparently received advance warning of the federal raid and attempted to flee the facility through secret tunnels that connected the Institute to nearby buildings. However, federal agents had anticipated this possibility and had positioned surveillance teams around the entire complex to prevent any escapes. Eleanor was captured while attempting to reach a pre-arranged extraction point where corrupt officials had planned to assist her escape to Canada. Dr. Marcus Winchester was arrested at his residence while attempting to burn correspondence and research notes that documented his connections to international colleagues and his role in developing the Institute's experimental protocols. The materials he was attempting to destroy provided crucial evidence about the international scope of the conspiracy and identified similar operations in other countries that were conducting coordinated research programs. Dr. Margaret Winchester was found in the Institute's medical facility, where she had been systematically poisoning surviving subjects in an apparent attempt to eliminate witnesses who could testify about the experimental procedures they had endured. Her actions during the raid revealed the calculated nature of the family's cruelty and their complete lack of regard for human life. The surviving subjects who were rescued from her elimination efforts provided crucial testimony about the Institute's activities and the broader conspiracy that had enabled its Operation. The trials that followed the Winchester family's arrest became the most extensively documented criminal proceedings in Pennsylvania's legal history, attracting international attention from medical professionals, legal scholars, and human rights advocates who recognized the case's significance for establishing precedents about medical ethics and institutional accountability. The federal prosecutors faced the unprecedented challenge of proving crimes that existing law had not specifically anticipated, forcing them to develop new legal theories about medical malpractice, human experimentation, and conspiracy that would influence criminal justice for generations. Survivor testimony painted a picture of systematic scientific torture that challenged contemporary understanding of both medical ethics and human psychology. The 47 individuals rescued from the Institute provided detailed accounts of experimental procedures that revealed the sophisticated methodology the Winchester family had developed for studying human responses to various forms of controlled suffering. Their testimony demonstrated that the family's activities constituted deliberate research rather than simple sadism, making their crimes more disturbing because of their calculated scientific approach. Dr. Jonathan Whitmore's sister Rebecca was among the survivors, though her physical and psychological condition had been permanently damaged by months of experimental treatment that had tested her responses to various pharmaceutical compounds and environmental manipulations. Rebecca's testimony was particularly powerful because her medical background allowed her to describe the procedures she had endured with clinical precision that convinced even skeptical observers of the systematic nature of the Institute's experimental programs. The extensive documentation seized during the federal raids provided overwhelming evidence of the conspiracy's scope and duration, revealing financial records that showed millions of dollars in payments from wealthy clients and government agencies that had funded the Institute's research activities. The records documented a sophisticated business operation that had generated enormous profits while maintaining the appearance of legitimate medical and charitable activities through carefully constructed accounting procedures and legal arrangements. International correspondence discovered in Dr. Marcus Winchester's files led to investigations of similar operations in Germany, France, and England that exposed a global network of institutions conducting coordinated human experimentation under various medical and scientific covers. These investigations revealed that the Winchester family's operation was part of a broader pattern of systematic abuse that had infected medical institutions throughout the industrialized world, suggesting that their crimes represented symptoms of deeper problems within the medical and scientific communities. The legal proceedings were complicated by the deaths of several key witnesses, who had been eliminated by remaining members of the conspiracy before they could provide testimony about the broader network of corruption and complicity. Judge Caldwell was found dead in his chambers under circumstances that suggested suicide, though investigators suspected that he had been murdered to prevent him from revealing information about other participants in the conspiracy. Dr. Samuel Winchester received a death sentence that was carried out in 1925, making him one of the first individuals in American history to be executed specifically for crimes related to medical experimentation on human subjects. His execution established legal precedents that would influence international laws about medical ethics and human rights for decades, though many observers felt that even the ultimate penalty was inadequate given the scope and duration of his crimes. Eleanor Winchester was sentenced to life imprisonment and died in federal custody in 1943, reportedly killed by fellow inmates who had learned about her role in the systematic torture and murder of hundreds of innocent individuals. Her death eliminated one of the few remaining sources of information about the conspiracy's operations and the identities of clients and accomplices who had escaped prosecution. Dr. Marcus Winchester received life imprisonment and spent his remaining years in solitary confinement, where he continued his research by conducting psychological experiments on himself and documenting his observations in detailed journals that were confiscated by prison authorities. His prison writings revealed a mind that had never acknowledged the human cost of his scientific activities and continued to view his victims as research subjects, rather than human beings deserving of compassion and respect. Dr. Margaret Winchester was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial after psychological evaluation revealed that she had suffered a complete break from reality that left her unable to understand the nature of her crimes or assist in her defense. She spent the remainder of her life in a federal psychiatric facility, where she continued to believe that she was conducting important medical research that would benefit humanity through scientific advancement. The Ashford Institute building was demolished in 1926, with authorities ordering that the site remain vacant for 50 years as a memorial to the victims and a reminder of the potential for evil that exists when scientific authority is exercised without moral constraints. The demolition crews discovered additional hidden chambers and secret passages that revealed the full extent of the facility's experimental capabilities, including underground laboratories that had not been found during the original federal raids. The Winchester family case led to comprehensive reforms in medical regulation and institutional oversight that established new standards for protecting vulnerable populations from abuse by medical professionals and research institutions. These reforms required detailed documentation of all medical procedures, independent oversight of research activities, and legal protections for individuals who reported suspected abuse or misconduct by medical authorities. The case also influenced the development of international laws about human experimentation and medical ethics that were incorporated into the Geneva Conventions and other international agreements, designed to prevent similar atrocities from occurring in the future. The Winchester family's crimes provided compelling evidence for arguments about the need for strict regulation of medical research and the importance of maintaining ethical standards even in the pursuit of scientific advancement. Modern analysis of the Winchester family's documentation has provided valuable insights into the psychology of systematic abuse and the social conditions that enable such operations to flourish without detection. Researchers have used the case to understand how apparently normal individuals can be gradually corrupted into participating in systematic cruelty, and how institutional authority can be perverted to serve the darkest human impulses rather than promoting healing and human welfare. The legacy of the Winchester family continues to serve as a warning about the potential for evil that exists when good people choose to remain silent in the face of obvious signs of systematic abuse. Their operation succeeded for over 3 decades, because hundreds of individuals chose to ignore suspicious circumstances, accept convenient explanations, and prioritize their personal interests over the welfare of vulnerable victims who had no power to protect themselves. The case demonstrates that the most dangerous criminals are often those who can disguise their cruelty as legitimate authority and use society's own institutions as weapons against the innocent. The Winchester family's ability to operate under the cover of medical respectability for so many years reveals the importance of maintaining skepticism about institutional claims and demanding transparency from organizations that exercise power over vulnerable populations. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.